everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, as you heard when you logged on, that this webinar is being recorded. We will share that recording with all registrants after the session, so you can share it with your networks, refer back to it, and all of that. So we will send that via email to all of you. Also, we encourage this to be an interactive discussion, so please feel free to use the Q&A part of Zoom and submit your questions as you have them. We will be monitoring the questions throughout the session, and we'll address as many as we can. So we are grateful you are here and excited for today's conversation. I will start with just a little bit about the ECAC. So the Enterprise Communications Advocacy Coalition is the host of today's webinar. We are a member partner organization dedicated to supporting and advancing the contact center and customer communication industry. The ECAC provides timely regulatory updates, educational webinars such as we're having today, and advocacy to help organizations stay informed, compliant, and prepared for what's ahead. Through collaboration, thought leadership, and industry engagement, we empower our member partners to navigate change with confidence and strengthen the future of enterprise communications. And with that, it is my honor to introduce today's moderator, ECAC board member, treasurer, and president of Mobius Vendor Partners, Bob Kobek. So take it away, Bob.
So I should point out that your name is Callie Smith, and you're the director of communications for the ECAC. And so, Callie's the one that does all the heavy lifting here. So I had the pleasure of being introduced to Diya Wynn a couple of years ago when she gave a presentation to a group called Conscious Capitalism here in Indianapolis that I was a part of. And it was intriguing when she talked about being conscious when using things, particularly tools like AI. And so she's going to address that pretty hefty today. And I met Zach at a political gig. And so we are advocates. We do play in politics. We do dabble where it matters. And so Zach, as it turns out, he'll tell you more about it, but is a former U.S. attorney. So Diya, tell us about Diya, and then you introduce Zach.
All right, thank you so much for having me. And yes, it was an exciting conversation we had an opportunity to have a few years ago with Conscious Capitalism. As mentioned, I'm Diya Wynn. I have been working at Amazon Web Services for about almost 9 years, and I had the privilege of starting our very first responsible AI practice from the ground up. So envisioning what that looked like as we engage customers that we're building with our AI services. I think the other part of the perspective I bring is just working at the edge of emerging technology over the last few decades. So across 6 major technology waves, from the internet boom all the way to now AI. And I think that gives me quite a perspective when we think about the impact that technology has and the way in which we should be thinking about it serving people, not just processing them. So my work really sits at the intersection of enterprise AI deployment, governance, and then the human question around who gets to benefit from the technology and who gets left behind, and the way in which we can be much more intentional about building durable AI systems to make sure that technology meets people at some of their most vulnerable moments, but really benefits us all. And I'm excited to be a part of this conversation.
How about you, Zach?
Excellent. And I'm, honored to be able to share this conversation with the two of you. I am Zach Myers. I, in a prior, life over the last 14 years, was at the U.S. Department of Justice, where in the various roles I served, I was for about 10 years a federal prosecutor focused on cybercrime, technology facilitated crimes, and a lot of the intersection between sort of technology and all of the worst things that people do to each other. And I spent the last 3.5 years of my service as the Senate appointed presidentially appointed Senate confirmed U.S. Attorney for my hometown here of Indianapolis in the Southern District of Indiana. And in that role, both led the federal prosecutor's office covering about 4.2 million people here in my home state, but also worked across the Department of Justice on issues with my fellow U.S. attorneys and people in DOJ headquarters, including sort of how the Department of Justice was approaching AI, both from employing tools on behalf of the government in our investigations and our processes, as well as confronting the challenges brought by malevolent uses of these emerging technologies, sort of figuring out what our policies and approaches were going to be as part of our, overall cybercrime strategy and comprehensive cyber strategy for the DOJ. And so, and I spent a minute working on Capitol Hill as irrelevant to the ECAC in a prior life for the congresswoman who represented my hometown. And so I'm very glad now to be a partner at the law firm of McCarter and English in our Indianapolis office, where I co-chair the firm's cybersecurity and data privacy practice. And in addition to the litigation and investigations work, I have I have the privilege of being able to help clients navigate some of these emerging regulatory and technology issues that I know are facing, ECAC and its members. So I'm glad to be able to be here, and talk about some of it with, some great folks today.
Kind of brings us in a way to a convergence between what Diya and her area of expertise and your area of expertise, Zach, predominantly. For instance, one of the things that I know Diya is going to talk about, and I'll just start right at you right now, Diya, is the fact that, there's always a debate between build it or buy it. Do you build your own technology or do you buy the technology? And I'm a proponent of doing both. Because when you buy the technology, you like to think that whoever the provider is keeping up with the rules and regulations that are going on. But the rules and regulations in AI, I mean, there's a constant barrage of change. I mean, so it's almost like, the call center, contact center industry is back to death by paper cut. So give me your take on that. And then Zach, when she's finished with that, give us an idea of what happens when you don't.
Yeah, so I think you framed, the beginning part of this in an interesting way, whether you build or you buy. And I think the build or buy question really is going to differ depending on, what matters and where your area of expertise is, right? And certainly a lot of businesses, companies are going to be at some level buying because they are not going to be the ones that are building perhaps large language models, and they will be leveraging at least that foundation, or not just large language models, but foundation models, right? They'll be leveraging that as a basis for what they may be creating or buying some technology or systems from other providers. And so that's one element of it, right? What do we do and where does accountability or responsibility lie? And how much you, even in the context of buying a product, have to consider, what ways do you test and ensure that the kinds of things are existent in that platform, right, or that product? Is there the right kind of testing that's been done, transparency about how those test results land? What does that mean for the community that you or the customers that you're intending to serve, right? So there's a responsibility that whether you buy or build, you need to consider or make sure, and this is part of, I would say, vendor management, right? Did we infuse good, responsible practices around AI into even how we select and procure vendors when we're buying technology, or have that in place in the products that we develop? The other piece of what you sort of highlighted was this emergent space that we have around laws that are being introduced now to curtail or contain, AI at some level. And across a number of different states, there is, some emergent regulation that could be applicable at some level to, contact center and customer service type applications. Um, I think at the core, the foundation of them are really, or one part of them that hold true is a level of transparency that there is expected. Transparency when AI is being used. And that's important because some of what is emerging in the law has been a result of an absence of knowing when customers or users were engaging with technology, when they were engaging with AI. And then the other piece of this is to address some of the emergent harms, right? Some of the ways in which technology might be used in erroneous ways, or in ways that could result in harm, or even in cases where it's unintended. So these sort of considerations, I think, are ones that are being played out in legislation, whether that is, some element of what's happening in Colorado, or in Maine, or others. I think, the foundation of them are centered around transparency when AI is being used, and then looking at other areas that could or could not be applicable to contact center, depending on, the ways in which they're using the technology. I think the other bit of that I'll just sort of elevate quickly is that I think that we have to consider, whether or not there's regulation or not, like where is the opportunity for organizations or enterprises, businesses like yours, to be thinking about where might customers be most harmed by fragile AI systems, whether there's like regulation in place or legislation in place or not? Because oftentimes regulation is going to be the floor, right? The baseline. And where can we actually build systems that are going to make sure that we're not just meeting the minimum, but being considerate of like the customers that often may not be considered, to make sure that there's the kind of inclusion in design, as well as the sort of regulatory compliance that's necessary when we're developing or when we're using a system.
Zach, that then begs the question: who's culpable? Is it the call center? Is it the contact center? Is it the client? Is it the customer? I mean, who? I mean, Diya just laid out basically a scenario where people can be harmed. I mean, that's a given.
Absolutely. And I think that when harms happen and tied with these technologies, I think we're already seeing that they're going to, that people are going to look everywhere for recompense, and that, you're going to see evolving court decisions and, regulations and government policies that could apportion, paying for those harms in all sorts of ways that we haven't figured out yet. But typically, folks are seeking to recover from the people who have, some ability to pay to try to make things good. And so when you're in an industry like this, and if you are, having some success, realizing that even though you might not think that your role in this ecosystem or how you're choosing and deploying these tools exposes you, fairly to liability, until an action is brought, and whether it's arbitrated, litigated, what have you, you're not sure. I don't think you can be sure, whether you're going to be on the hook for what is done or not. I think that when Diya was talking about sort of those basic issues of, well, you're going to be moving into this space, or you're going to be building tools, or you're going to be buying tools, or some combination of them, understanding really what it is that you are buying or what it is that you are building and what it does. The conversation that lawyers like me have, as we try to figure out sort of what regulations, what laws apply and govern, how an entity is making use of technology and really, making use of data, those core concepts of, you have to understand, what is it that you have? Where is it sitting? Who has access to it? How long do you keep it? Where is it from? And you need to be able to answer those questions intelligently in order to figure out what rules apply and what risks exist. And I think what this AI revolution is doing is vastly expanding sort of the attack surface of where these problems might be created. And it's harder for organizations if they're not careful in that process of selecting or building tools to really give good answers to those questions until something goes wrong.
That brings us to the question of Diya, you had something. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I think, what Zach is elevating is the necessity. And I don't think people often think of this as much, right? Many companies, when they're buying, and I see this from an enterprise perspective, many companies, when they're buying technology, have a checklist, vendor management sort of review, as part, or vendor review as part of their process, but had not been tailoring those processes in the same way to be able to dig into elements of AI, right? And that is to understand, as you said, some of where data is being used, or how have they tested to identify and measure, fairness across those systems. That's something that's specific in provision around Colorado. That's different in others. But like having this understanding, and since many of us are buying technology, like, getting things that are pre-built and either building on top of that or using that in some fashion in their organizations, this element of vendor management becomes even more critical, because the question of liability is going to is still being determined, right, where those lines fall. But at some level, there is a degree of responsibility that you as a deployer, right, using the technology has, and having that baseline understanding is going to be critical.
Regardless of who you're using it for.
Yes, absolutely.
Agree with that, Zach?
I do, and I think that because we're understandably very focused about that changing regulatory environment, and as she was talking about the various states who are in the various points in the process of implementing specific legislation or regulation around AI, but I think that when we're young prosecutors, one of the things they teach you is that you're trying to solve a problem, and what are the tools at hand to address that problem. And from a legal standpoint, yes, there are these emerging tools and sort of specific to AI governance regulations and laws that are in the pipeline, but the law does not move at the speed of technology or at the speed of business. And so when you're trying to, from a legal standpoint, address a problem like that, you're not just waiting for the new AI regulation in your state to come out. You're looking at the code book, like you would as a prosecutor, say, okay, what tools do I already have at hand, and how do I apply them to this new problem set? And that's, whether it is just consumer transparency, fair trade type regulations in terms of disclosing to consumers fairly the information that you might be required to, in terms of who they are communicating with when you're talking about the contact center context, or what you are doing with the data that a customer might input into a fully automated system that is interfacing with the customer, and now is obtaining information from them that, whether you intended to or not, this information has implications for various types of privacy laws or heightened regulations. Where'd that information go? Who has access to it? How is it secured? How is it being stored?
Right.
What are you doing to ensure that what the customers are giving you is not creating new liability for you in terms of how you handle that, and what vendors you might be giving that information to? And so the existing framework of laws and regulations is, I think, maybe even more important in some ways than what's coming down the pipeline as you're trying to figure out how to orient your business and how to deploy these tools, because that is the currently existing structure of risk, in addition to the new risks that are coming down the pipeline with emerging laws and regulations.
I don't know if you noticed this or not, but you've been getting nods of assent and agreement from Diya, and in fact, at one point, she also even smiled an agreement about something you said. So
I'll
this,
take that.
that's good news. I mean, we're all on the same path, and so it kind of gets me then back to, if I could just sort of morph to a slightly different topic, because there's a fine line between improving customer experience, thinking that you're improving customer experience using a tool like AI, and then, though, at the same time, the automation might be putting you in some legal or reputational exposure. I mean, how would you say that can be managed. Does that make sense? The question makes sense?
Yeah, I know. No, it absolutely does, right? Because I think that, at the baseline, most people are expecting to use AI at some level because they think that it's going to provide greater optimization. I can do some things faster than I was doing before. It's going to free me up in some areas so that I get greater efficiency, and I'm going to be able to provide some better service. I hope that people are focused on the latter, right? The opportunity to provide better service now that AI has move some of the, as we would say, undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? The routine sort of things that I can actually focus as a business on. Where are the opportunities for us to deliver a greater level of service, to do more, and providing for our customers perhaps that we didn't do before. And so I don't think, well, there are, I shouldn't say I don't think, there is a segment of the population that are using the tools and don't have, good intention, right? Put those aside. Most people that are the other sort of element of this is expecting that they're going to leverage it in a way, as you said, to provide greater benefit to their customers, and aren't using the technology with the expectation of creating a condition of harm or unintended impact. I think the way to safeguard and ensure that they're actually doing that is to have what I would call responsible AI practices in place, right? To think about and when we talk about, or when oftentimes I talk about responsible AI, it is, the things that we operationalize, put into practice across people, process, and technology that actually help us to reduce the risk, right? And to address potential areas of unintended impact. So it's putting in a framework, right? And the first thing that I would say, one like a principle that I would elevate is, build around what won't change. You heard Zach mention that regulation is going to shift, and we already know that there is technology is emerging and advancing at a pace that there is no regulation that's going to kind of keep up, right? That's always going to be lagging. So, are there things that you can build or consider that become not just legally or regulatory acceptable, but the things that we do that are ethically acceptable, like considering, you know, making sure that I'm building in ways that are not going to deceive our customers, thinking about the kind of transparency that's necessary. I think that's the second element of this, right? Not just building what can last, whether or not regulation exists, but then putting in place the kind of transparency that's necessary to support and that will support any one of the potential laws that come in place, right? I am being kind of upfront as a business about where people are interfacing with AI and technology, and when it's making certain decisions. So the appropriate disclosures. I think the other element is um, um, thinking about whether or not we're building for the full range of customers, or considering all of the stakeholders that would be impacted by the system, not just the average or the 80%, right? And so this notion of designing for all of your stakeholders, or considering the impact to all of your stakeholders, um, for in the context of the call center would be like the elderly customer, or the person with a language barrier, or a different perhaps accent or dialect that would mean something different with an automated system is in play. But that kind of inclusive design, I think, is a durable strategy that helps to ensure that we're building systems that last and that work and benefit all your customers. And then I think it's building in the accountability, which is adjacent to the earlier conversation about like who ultimately is responsible. Well, having an accountability architecture means that we're going to have humans in the loop that are empowered to perhaps stop at a release or stop functionality and features when they're not at the right level or doing the appropriate things, that we have monitoring in place to be able to detect and understand when things are going wrong, that we understand our vendors practicing. That's the kind of sort of accountability architecture that needs to be built in. Um, and that's the kind of structure that I think is required as we look at building or implementing, that helps to ensure that the systems are doing what we intend, are doing more of what we intend in terms of serving our customer base, and reducing the potential that those things are out of whack or not in alignment with our ultimate objectives.
I know that every state's going to be a little different. I mean, that's what I mean about if there's one industry that knows and understands death by paper cuts, it's the contact center industry. I mean,
Uh-huh.
TCPA and 50 different state laws, regulations, and rules. Plus, then finally there was an attempt at preemption at the federal level. And in this particular instance, Donald Trump has said no AI legislation or rules. However, a lot of states are still doing some things to mitigate that,
Oh,
to say
yeah. And
we
there's
are.
over, I think they're saying there are over 700 laws across the states that have been introduced already. And we're barely in the complete with
Yeah,
the
we're
second
barely into
month
the
of the
legislative
year.
session.
So
Yeah.
that federal level sort of preemption is not holding at this particular point, and states across the board are looking at ways to be able to curtail what they believe are potential, harms and risks with AI.
And see where I think, this is not quite an ECAC official position because the board hasn't voted on this yet, but we're going to propose it. And that is that we've got to be mindful of this potential collision, not just a clash, but a collision between AI and data privacy. Because it's all where the data privacy laws, I mean, those things are getting introduced and passed everywhere. And do not sell my information. Well, if I do anything on AI, if I'm not careful, it becomes public domain. I mean, so it almost then even breaches into the intellectual property area, Zach. I mean that yeah, so all of those regulations are going to have to heap on top of each other.
And so, and not that it's designed to be full employment for lawyers, but it's, having
Everything
so
we do,
those effects.
it's either you or
Right,
Microsoft.
right. AI will not replace lawyers, right? For sure, for sure.
Well, I've told lawyers that if AI is able to replace what you're doing for your clients, then maybe you should be doing something different for your clients. That I think that what Dia was talking about, that structured framework in making decisions about what it is that you are doing with these tools. That for those of us who are, I guess I think of myself older than I did maybe 10 years ago, who remember the dot-com boom and everything was the internet. Like, okay, your business uses the internet. Well, that's great. Uses the internet to do what? Uses, electricity to do what? Uses a car to do what? Like there's new technology isn't new. We've had changes in technology, massive changes in technology, again and again. And the structures that we use to regulate that and to hash out, what the rules of the road are, we usually refer back to the ones that are already existing and just try to squeeze, existing laws into this new space. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're going to be doing as we go through the massive, glut of AI specific regulations coming through. But Bob, you talked about the intersection with privacy law and, with breach law. I mean, right now, every state in the Union and the District of Columbia has its own specific data breach law, all of which are a little bit different. And I think we're up to 24 now states, including, recently my home state here of Indiana, have introduced comprehensive data privacy laws in addition to the breach laws. So if your AI agent is communicating with customers in 50 states and, retaining the information that's being spoken to or written to them or gained from those customers, and then the third party platform that you're using that's having these interactions and storing this information is breached and that information is out in the wild, who's liable? Liable for what under, what state's laws, what is happening, and thinking through some of these issues on the front end, because once you collect data, and that's, I think, one of the things that's just so fundamentally different about using these automated systems instead of having a live agent. Now, I know we're used to recording all those interactions with the live agent, and so you've thought through some of those things, I think, as an industry, but you're creating and collecting all this information from end users that are, individuals that you didn't used to do before. And so in addition to the AI governance, type issues that you have to think about for the tool you're using to do that, you also have to think about how that implicates things like privacy and breach laws, like you were talking about.
GDPR sent when GDPR first came out, it sent nerve shocks through every synapse in the contact center industry. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But then when we look at it today, that was kind of like the original preemption. So you didn't have to worry about that again, death by paper cuts if you were doing business in Europe and if you were doing, from the US doing business in Europe. But now we do have the issue of 50 states with data privacy. Almost all of them have a do not sell provision, which if you're using the wrong AI, you don't have to worry about selling it because it's out there. I mean, your customer's data is out there. So, Diya, I mean, that's where it kind of got back to the thing where I originally asked, buy it or build it. I think in some cases, if you buy it, you might have a provider that's going to be a little bit smarter. It's going to help maintain those compliance issues.
I mean, that's the hope, right? And I think that there are certainly providers that are doing some of the right things, even before regulation was put in place to have some principle or practice that they were establishing around ethical, trustworthy, or responsible AI, whatever flavor of that they might have called it, in order to be able to, do some foundational things so that there is a layer of trust that they could, an assurance they could provide to their customers, saying, we've built this in an ethical way. We've ethically sourced our data. We've tested around this, a number of certain conditions. We continue to red team and other sort of practices to be able to understand the robustness of our environment, and hopefully offering that to you as a customer with some baseline assurance that you could have some confidence. I think some of the other areas, though, of course, is when you start capturing other data, like in production, some of those conditions change, right? What we do in baseline development versus what AI does in operation and production, there can be shifts, and so there is still a level of responsibility that a deployer, someone that's leveraging the tool, also will have as well. I wanted to also just double click on something that Zach mentioned, when he was talking about like some of the existing regulation that is there, and I think this is often a conversation, right? Or a conversation point, because some people will say, we have enough of regulation that exists, and isn't this sufficient for us, even in the case where we're introducing AI? And I think in some cases, this is true, right? That there are existing, law and regulation that covers, right? And that's whether, if your AI discriminates, you're liable. And there's already, legislation on the book that talks about like not discriminating. You know, there is, fair lending laws, there are fair housing laws, consumer protection laws, right?
Healthcare, there are disclosure laws.
Right. All of that stuff exists. And so those things still should apply. But there are, in fact, like, conditions where AI creates new harms, and or is creating conditions of scale that the existing laws perhaps do not handle, right? Because they focus on fraud and misrepresentation that might be at human speed versus, what happens when AI is applied and is doing this at, a level of scale that could have even greater impact. Does our existing law, address the liability, that kind of liability after the fact, right? Where we have greater challenges around identity deception. And it's at a level, again, that probably did not exist before. So a pre-recorded message was obviously a recording. Now we don't know if an AI voice is indeed an AI voice. It's indistinguishable from that of a real human in many cases, right? That creates in some ways a different threat, perhaps, particularly for, again, I think of those that we may not always build for, like the elderly or a vulnerable population with whom, individuals are actually targeting with scams, right? So does existing law actually exist that handles that particular condition? And then, an area that I think is emerging in terms of consideration is the one around emotional manipulation, right? When AI is deliberately being designed in ways that will build a rapport, feels like a relationship, extends engagement in a way that serves the business much more than it serves the customer. And I don't think our consumer protection laws were designed to navigate that or to handle those. And so while there is existing law that I think should definitely apply, there are probably, in my opinion, a few areas where there is a need, and AI is introducing new harms that perhaps are considerations that this industry should be paying attention to, especially the latter one, right? Because I think there was something that the FTC recently launched in terms of research and investigation around like the questions about AI companions and their impact on mental health and what that means potentially for, in this context, right? So, true, we don't necessarily need new regulation, and there is some, but and we don't want to create more regulation for the sake of just having more, but where there's a gap, right, where AI actually changes the scope or is creating new conditions of harm, there still needs to be work there, I believe.
I mean, I had a police officer tell me one time that locks keep honest people honest. And, we could heap, to your point, heap regulation on top of regulation. At some point, and that's where the human interaction part starts to play a bigger role. That if you're going to rely solely on AI for your customer service or even if it's lead generation, you're going to use AI for lead generation. You're not going to, it can't possibly be as successful as that human being making that call. And we're never going to be able to regulate all of it away. I mean, we know that because we keep trying to put new fraud laws and fraud enforcement and, geez, Zach, I don't know how many people you prosecuted for the same damn thing, right? I mean,
Eventually, you can have a copy and paste indictment. And I mean, I guess some people do. And the two, I think, different like ways of thinking it that Diya was talking about that I think are important, that in terms of those sorts of frauds, technology like this emerging category of technologies we're seeing enables the bad things that are already happening. Fraud and scams and targeting of the elderly have happened since people were doing fraud through the mail. I mean, the mail fraud statute is still what we use to do all sorts of things. Or, fraud through the wires that when it was passed, we meant like, the telegraph wires. And so we kept using those technologies as, I used those technologies as a prosecutor to go after people who were doing, international identity theft scams. And, it's the same law, we're just using it differently. But for things like that and threats like that, we're talking about the use of these technologies that enable the bad actors to, and the same way they do good actors, to do what they were already doing at a scale and speed that the technology previously did not allow. But that's a separate category of issues than the other category she was talking about of there are unique categories of, I think, good and ill created by these categories of technology that, are maybe not addressed by existing law or regulations or policies. Now, you think about, I prosecuted a lot of cases where people, developed relationships of trust over, purely over, the internet and social media with the vulnerable who they then, exploited, because of that. But that took an individual sitting there, fingers at keyboard, keeping lists of the people who they were exploiting or extorting or what have you. And now your AI agent is doing all of that crime for you and managing, a number of victims simultaneously that, one person could never do. And those people are developing those relationships of trust and giving away, whether it's money or compromising images or whatever it might be, they're giving that away to a robot that they think a program that they think that they have this emotional connection with because the technology has evolved to the point where not only through text, but through, voice and video, you can convincingly, I'm not saying we're like in Turing tests, like, we can't tell the difference between the people and the robots quite yet, but we're clearly much
Yeah,
closer than we were 5 years ago. I don't know if you've seen those videos of celebrities, who, you have them reading through a script and they say, I'm here, this isn't actually me, this is AI. Like, that day is here, and very smart people who don't have good intentions are immediately putting to work those technologies for the kinds of things that they were doing before, but at a scale we haven't heard of. And they're coming up with new bad things that we wouldn't have thought to do, but now they're enabled to do. And so just, you know, the I used to say to groups that, criminals are people just like us. And when we have these transformative technologies that can do all these great things for our businesses, for, our communities, that, people with ill intentions are absolutely seeing and having access to the same thing, and maybe even willing to move faster because they have a higher risk tolerance. And, you just have to keep in mind that, we have to protect ourselves from those sorts of bad actors, even as we're trying to adopt these technologies to do
I want
good for ourselves.
I want to make sure that it's very, very clear that neither Dia nor I use the F word. The word fraud did not come out of our mouth. It came out of yours. So because the point is that in the contact center industry, for God's sakes, use AI. I mean, it's going to help your business. It is going to streamline, it's going to make you a little smarter, because it also learns, I mean, it can also learn as you're going along, and learn compliance issues. It can learn, and therefore teach, and it can do it. And some of it is so sophisticated, it can do it real time. So, the contact center industry is probably going to be one of the largest adopters of AI technology. And what we were hoping to accomplish today, and I believe we did, was to say, use it, be careful, use it, for gosh sakes. Don't not use it. I mean, AWS is in the space for a reason. It's profitable, it's streamlined, it's good for what you do, but be mindful, the environment is going to be changing constantly, forever. I mean, AI is not just evolving, it's like a rocket ship. It's just going straight up. I mean, Dia, you're in the middle of it, right? I mean, so it's growing fast.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
but I agree with you, and I think as you kind of shift the reframe, right, there is such opportunity, and in the contact center space, but so many others. And I think the challenge for us is just again to think about what are the opportunities that exist now, leveraging the technology for us to do more in serving our customers. To reach, and we probably all have lists of features, functionality, capability that we were hoping to get to. We've gotten feedback from our customers about things that we missed the mark on or haven't quite delivered, or it would be great that we could have. And how does AI now provide capability for us to be able to do that in service of our customers? Um, and I think that's for me is like the greater sort of challenge, or the greater opportunity that exists beyond
that's
just
right. Yeah.
doing something faster and getting to more. But what else do we do in adding value now because we have this technology at our disposal?
So I don't see any questions in the Q&A, which means we must have done really, really good job here. Well, I mean,
Or put them
I'm
to sleep? No.
well. Listen, I don't know about YouTube, but I could listen to YouTube talk for another hour at least. And what I'd like to, do is pencil in 1 year from today and have the
Mm,
same conversation and see how
like what's
different.
evolved, right?
Yeah, because we know it's going to evolve, and the three of us we're not gonna take our focus away. I mean, it's what we do.
Right.
So and the ECAC is, it's so hard to to pay attention to everything that we're doing as lobbyists. And so full disclosure, we have to use AI to keep track of what's going on in both Washington and every state, and but ours does have the firewall, because you could take some of the stuff that we're doing and use it for evil. I mean, any law out there. Like I said, locks keep honest people honest. I remember in an earlier life, I worked in the United States Senate, and very early on in my tenure there, I was helping pass a piece of legislation, and I spotted something and said, I don't think that's going to fly. And my boss said, Bob, that's a loophole, and every law has a loophole, and every loophole is intended. So we'll see what develops over the next year or so, and in the next months or so. And we would invite you to join us as we're going through this whole process of helping our members understand that collision that's going to happen between data privacy and AI. Because we think that's where it's going to hurt the most.
It'll be interesting to come back, as you say, and look at what's emerged and new ways in which people are using the technology. And I think an example like you just described is a good one, right? Trying to keep abreast of all that's happening because just in the US alone, the number of laws that have been proposed, right? I mean, the number is getting unwieldy, right? Already in the beginning part of the year. And so what better way to leverage the AI, especially in an area that is a supporting function in some ways, right? To just keep up with like what's happening, what do we have to pay attention to, what matters, what shifts do we need to now make because regulation is at bay, and then use your lawyer to help, like really dictate like where the guardrails need to be in your organization, right? But I think that if we're framing it right, and a good foundation is around transparency, that's a good place to start because most of what's coming out has some element of transparency and disclosure as a baseline.
Zach, you want to put a wrap on it?
Yeah, well, I'm looking in the Q&A. We've gotten a question that I think touches on exactly what Diya was just saying in terms of the use of AI in call reviews, and that working from the question. I don't know if everyone sees the questions here, but that the asker is saying they have a stringent compliance list to work off of, but but we do have a call center using AI for their QC reviews. And like any good lawyer, my first answer to the question would be, well, it depends. But
It's your favorite word.
I think that those compliance lists and where they come from need to, I think, be expanded because of how we're deploying these technologies, and exactly that privacy issue that you keep coming to is important. That you've got these recorded calls, and for depending on where you're sending that data or how you're interacting with it, the laws that you might need to comply with may change, and depending on what states you're dealing with, the fact that you warned someone of something or had them consent to it might not escape certain regulation or liability that you think it might, or that you have a vendor who has warranted to you that they're treating your data in such a way, but under some states' regulations, kind of you can't, be indemnified, like that doesn't matter. You're still ultimately culpable for harms related to information given to you by customers, even if something happens downstream. And so when it comes to things like using the technology in the context of a call review, where those servers sit matters. What happens to that data after the review is done matters, and who has access to things matters, and the details of those agreements with whoever that AI provider really has to be looked at carefully. But from a helping your business succeed and doing what you need to for your clients and customers, absolutely, lawyers can sound Debbie Downer, but no, these technologies are, amazing in many ways. And there's all these great applications that people are coming up with, and the the contact center industry, I think, like Diya was saying, is just rife with opportunities to provide value and efficiency, using these technologies. And it's just, be careful as you do it.
Well, I mean,
the other thing that I would just go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was going to say that to Lori's question, though, Zach, her question is, I think, about how Okay, AI in the case of quality control, which is what she's focused on.
Mhm.
So, the QA after the call. So, you take it, you basically are pulling the text and turning it, sorry, voice to text and then text to analytics. And is the way the QA part works inside with QA, but it doesn't measure tone. And so
I'm not an engineer, but I'm friends with some. And to the extent that maybe today we can't say it, maybe we can, but I think that the day where we can say that to some degree the technologies are measuring tone, is not forever from now. It might already be today. But so I think it is possible to get to that point where, the technology is measuring, tone or taking like the temperature of a.
It does.
Dia knows more than me on
Yeah,
this.
no, there absolutely are products today that do both sentiment analysis as well as tone analysis. So the technology will look at sentiment, driven by the word choice, the order of words. It can look at, and derive emotional clues, such as frustration or satisfaction. It analyzes that across the pitch, the pace, word choice. And so some of that sentiment and tone is being done with AI, and certainly sentiment analysis has been around much longer than the tone analysis, but that's been an evolution of the technology. And so there are platforms that are doing that are better than others. There are nuances as it relates to this, right? So, for instance, in certain regions, there will be inflections in voice, changes in pitch, just by nature of the culture, right? So, for instance, I've often heard people refer to like Arabs, those that from Arab nations, even though they're speaking English, will have different intonations in regular language that will not dictate that they're angry or that they are frustrated, even though they have fluctuations in their voice different than that might be of someone who is a native English speaker. And so you've got to look at how well they're testing across different cultures, across different dialects, across different languages to make sure that there is accuracy there across all of them. But again, some platforms do this better than others, but you certainly have products that will support and have a breadth of sort of understanding across sentiment and tone, across cultures, across language, and even do that better with certain levels of accessibility, right? So somebody that has a slower sort of gait in their talking because they have a certain disease will differ in terms of how that gets assessed by the AI. And those are elements, again, that have to be considered in testing to really proof out how well this is. That's where human review, I think, is necessary, especially in your sort of testing and rolling this out so that you really can get that understanding of how well it is aligning with what would be expected of an outcome. But I think that to sort of speak to that, I think there is certainly opportunity for the technology to be used in a QA process. I think there are businesses and organizations that are seeing success in leveraging the technology there. Has an element of human review or opportunity to be able to escalate that to human review in certain situations. And those are conditions that an individual, like the team, can identify, right? So that they have this other layer of oversight. So I think that technology has advanced to a level that it could be very useful and beneficial in those contexts, in those use cases.
I had no idea.
And I think that cultural disconnect. Oh, sorry about that, Bob. But I think the cultural disconnect that Dia was identifying, that's a problem humans already have.
Yeah.
Like that's, the AI, AI is just like us. But and I think that if you can get past, like, maybe we shouldn't be calling any of this AI, and if we got the word intelligence out of it and the concept that we're outsourcing thinking as opposed to having amazing processing power that we didn't have before, that might reframe people's thinking. Because I think that in that sentiment context we're talking about, that when you train the AI, it's having those humans that are helping the technology understand, this call is going well, this is not, this is the tone. And then they're just replicating those analyses that humans are making at scale and with
Yes.
a predictability that we can't do. But it all starts with the initial data it's being trained on and how that is being guided in the first place. And so that human interaction guiding the systems, because they're not thinking, they're going the direction that you're pointing them, and they're doing it very
They're
well.
processing. Right.
It's the same issue that technology has always have and always will. Garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And Zach, I think, this is probably a good place, right? And I love that you elevated this because I do think language matters. I've even have a post that I did on LinkedIn about this in particular, right? And we probably won't shift people away from calling it intelligence because there are scientists that are actively, engaged in their research environments hoping to recreate or create intelligence in the way that we think about it. But I think our language does matter. It's processing, right? And the systems today, and even how they're designed, they don't think, right? It's processing. It's processing information that's being given. It processes inputs from a number of different sort of input streams. It can use a lot of the historical information and data and what we've trained on it to help it better process and translate, what it's given to be able to provide insights. But it really is not thinking, and we are still very much a part of instructing the system, whether it is by prompt, the data we provide, the reinforcement that we engage, right, to really steer those systems in certain directions. Now, yes, we can get into some of the philosophical about it steering itself, but in most cases, it is still being largely guided by, the what we provide, the input. Now, agentic gets a little, into some things where it's making decisions, but again, even that is steered by what it has been instructed in the way in which it's been trained. So, intelligence, in the way that we think of thinking, it does not do its processing, and we can help guide that processing. And I hope that we could do a lot more, right, in our structure, in our framing, and our guardrails to help steer it in positive ways that are going to be beneficial to how we engage.